Um, I'm Professor Aren Maier. I'm a professor of archaeology at Bar-Ilan University, which is in Ramat Gan, which is just outside of Tel Aviv in Israel. I've been dealing with archaeology for something like 30 years, and about 27, 28 years ago, I started working on a project at this site, Tel Es-Safi, which is identified as Gath of the Philistines. And ever since then, I've been coming out here every summer with a big group of people from all over the world. Well, the site was settled from prehistoric times until modern times, with remains from many cultures and many periods. But one of the main settlement activities on the site was during the Iron Age, the Philistines, well known from the Hebrew Bible. And of course, the most famous person who lived there, according to the biblical text, is Goliath, who was then later killed by David in the famous battle between the two of them. Now, this is identified as of Gath of the Philistines, which is one of the 5 major cities of the Philistines. And in fact, during a large part of the Iron Age, this was the largest Philistine site. And it's estimated to be at its largest about 50 hectares. And it was comprised of a large upper city, which we see behind me, and a large lower city where we are currently. And it was all fortified, and there were various types of buildings throughout the site. We have excavated in something like 13, 14 different areas all over the site: public buildings, temples, domestic quarters, production quarters. We have a olive oil industry. We have metal production, all kinds of aspects of daily life in this large city. And Gath of the Philistines was the largest city among the Philistine cities, and it probably also was the largest city in the land of Israel, in Canaan at the time, and it probably was the most important kingdom as well. In the lower city, we've excavated on the west side a temple or several temples and the city gate, a metal production area. Here we have a domestic neighborhood with houses, and in each house there was an olive press, and so all these people produced olive oil from the olive trees that you can still see today. We're sitting under one right now, and also within these houses, we found the vessels of everyday use, which include vessels in which they kept beer. And in these houses, we found several of the vessels, what we call beer jugs or strainer spouted vessels, in which in the analyses turned out to have the remains of yeasts, which were there from ancient times. We assume that people had, the wine and the beer that they drank on a regular basis. We don't know whether they produced them, each person produced it in his home or was produced in a more centralized manner, but we find the vessels in which they kept the beer. We don't know a lot about beer production in ancient Israel and the surrounding areas, but we do have a lot of information about the production of beer, both in ancient Egypt and in ancient Mesopotamia. And there we have texts, and in Egypt we have models of breweries and things like that. So based on these texts and these finds from ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, we can surmise how production was carried out also in this region, which is quite close. And we can connect various types of vessels and installations to possibly be related to the production of beer. Now, one of the big discoveries related to our work here with this interdisciplinary team is because we were able to identify the yeast, which had survived or continued to exist through the millennia. We were able to clearly show that a specific vessel was used for the production of yeast, and that is something very, very special. For many years, these jugs, which had a spout with a strainer, had been called beer jugs. with an assumption that they were used for the beer, that the beer was inside it. It was by pouring it through the spout, the residue that inside the beer was strained away, and then you poured it into a cup and you drank it for a cup. But there was no unanimous agreement or proof that in fact it was used for beer. For example, there was one suggestion was it was used for making a grappa-like drink. So when we took these vessels, which had a good chance of being related to beer, and then we found the yeast in them, and as opposed to all the other vessels around and the sediment around, we didn't find yeast, it was quite obvious that the yeast represents the part of the original contents of what was in this vessel, and then the beer idea, received, I would say, support. We have I would say, the pleasure and I would say, and it probably makes it so interesting, is that to discover the past, we have to utilize as many disciplines and methods of analysis as possible, because so little is actually remains from the past. And to try to understand from those so little as much as you can, so you have to bring in historical perspectives, anthropological perspectives, and perspectives from all the life sciences and the exact sciences. And that we're doing this all the time. For example, we use DNA, we use carbon-14, we use isotope analysis, and a slew of other methods. Now, the collaboration that we have in this case is a very nice example of this type of inter and multidisciplinary research. And what we did here is actually coming from Itai, who is a beer expert, and from Ronen and Michael, who are microbiologists. They came to us and said, let us help you discover the microorganisms that are connected to the production of beer or wine or cheese or pickles or whatever you want to. So it was basically, they came with the idea, and then the archaeologists who were involved in the project brought to them various vessels that for various reasons could be connected to beer, wine, mead, and all kinds of other alcoholic beverages. And so, we had some sort of a possible idea of a vessel that might be connected to this, and they checked it out. So it was actually, to a large extent, it was their idea here, because in the past, when we've done analyses of such vessels, in the last, I would say, decade or two, the method that we've used to discover the contents of vessels is what we call organic residue analysis. And there you discover organic molecules that have survived in the matrix of the ceramics over the years. And it doesn't always work, but sometimes you do have, and this can give you an idea of the contents. But in the case of, for example, beer, you'll find the organic molecules connected to it. But what we did here is we found the actual organisms, the microorganisms that are connected to the beer. And in fact, when we started finding the yeast cells in from the ancient vessels, colleagues said this is impossible. There's no way that yeast cells could have had continued to exist for 3,000 years after their use. They would have died long ago. But apparently, the yeast cells managed to find themselves microenvironments within the matrix of the ceramics of these vessels, and continue to exist at a very, very minimal amount of food for 3 millennia. And this is an astounding discovery, because I like talking about, we always talk about that we as archaeologists have we're sort of time travelers, and we get the chance to feel the past, because you pick up the sherd, like, you can all around here, and you can feel the sherds that the people used in the past. Here, to a certain extent, we're tasting the past, and that's fantastic. Up until now, when studying ancient beer, you had ancient sources that describe beer, modern day beer production using traditional methods, and remains of the beer production, whether in vessels or installations, and from within them you could find the chemical residue. Here we went that one additional step which enabled us to talk about identifying the specific microorganisms that were related to the production of beer or wine or mead. And without those microorganisms, you can mix together all these ingredients, but without the activity of the microorganisms, it's not going to turn into an alcoholic beverage. So that is what's special here. We took that additional step, which enabled us to show, for example, that the same yeast that is used till today for production of beer was used back then. And which was fantastic. It's connecting something 3,000 years ago that who would even believe that the yeast had managed to continue to survive over such a long period. As I said before, one of the nice aspects of modern archaeology is the interdisciplinary character and the fact that every year new methods coming from other fields are brought into archaeology. And for example, when I compare what I was taught as a student 30, 40 years ago and what I do now in the field, I like comparing it to the difference between 19th century medicine and 21st century medicine. We have the same aims, but we have a completely new toolkit available. Now, when we start working with other fields, for example, biologists or physics or chemists or whatever, they bring in different perspectives. And in fact, everybody is wired differently. And sometimes, as the director of a project, I have to sort of get everybody to speak, that they can understand each other. And I'm sort of like a CEO. And very often, the perspectives that the biologist or the chemist will bring in will be very different and very refreshing than sort of like we've been thinking as archaeologists all the time. And the example here where the biologist came and said, "Show us vessels, and we'll show you microorganisms," without their perspective, we wouldn't have done this. So this discovery is a very good foundation for expanding research and collaboration between archaeologists and microbiologists for several reasons. First of all, you can take the same method regarding yeast and go to other yeast-related vessels, or beer or wine or mead-related vessels found in other ancient cultures, and do the same process and discover what's the specific type of yeast that was used in these ancient cultures. And for example, here we found that while the common cerevisiae yeast is used here, there were also types of yeast that were less common, but we do know that they're used in beer production, for example, in Africa. So there is some diversity here, and if you check in other cultures, you get this as well. But in addition to this, and this is, I think, fantastic, this opens up a whole field for the study of food and liquids that were used in antiquity that are based on microorganisms, and that's all the alcoholic beverages, that's cheese, that's pickles, and a whole slew of other things which we eat till today. And if there weren't those friendly microorganisms working for us, we wouldn't have these things. So this opens up the opportunity, and in fact, we're now doing this on vessels which may be related to milk production, and we're not sure yet exactly what, and we're not 100% sure it is, but we're trying to use these methods of this, in this case, the continued existence of microbes which are related to very specific bacteria which are related to production of cheese in other vessels, not the vessels we're talking about here, but other types of vessels. And this, again, opens up a whole field of possible analyses and understanding of what the people ate in the past and what they drank, and even more, that perhaps we can recreate it and taste it.